"Sleep here tonight," the CEO whispered. The single dad didn't know she was his wife. "They actually let the help in through the front tonight," Marcus Vance said, loud enough for the man in the work jacket to hear. His daughter Bianca laughed into her champagne. "Careful, Daddy. He might try to fix the chandelier." The atrium of Vance Tower glittered. 40 stories of glass. A string quartet. 300 guests in black tie. Adam Cole stood near the service corridor in a clean but worn canvas jacket, a tool belt still looped at his hip, because no one had bothered to tell him the gala had started an hour early. He'd come to reset a tripped breaker. Now, 200 faces turned, found him, and decided what he was in less than a second. Marcus pointed with his glass. Bianca leaned to the woman beside her and mouthed the word maintenance, and it moved across the room like a draft under a door. A senator's wife smirked. Someone lifted a phone. Adam felt a small hand tighten around 2 of his fingers. He'd brought Sophie because the sitter had canceled, 5 years old, in light-up sneakers, pressing against his leg. He set his jaw, lifted his chin, looked for the nearest exit. What Marcus didn't know was that the woman who owned the building, Elena Vance, CEO, the name cut into steel above the door, was, by a vow, neither of them remembered the same way. This man's wife. What Bianca didn't know was that before midnight her father's lie of 12 years would be burning across every screen in the room. And what none of them knew, what even Adam didn't know, was that the little girl holding his hand had a mother somewhere in this tower who had been told 5 years ago that her baby had died. 6 days earlier, Adam Cole had no idea any of them existed. He woke that morning at 5:40 to the sound of Sophie coughing down the short hallway of their 1-bedroom apartment. He gave her the bedroom. He took the couch. That was the arrangement, and he'd stopped resenting it a long time ago. He measured the coffee grounds the way he measured everything now, carefully, twice. Made her oatmeal with the cinnamon she liked. Packed the lunch and slid in the note he wrote every day, even though she couldn't read all the words yet. "Love you, Bug." It was the kind of thing he did without deciding to, the way you keep doing something your hands learned before your memory broke. Because Adam's memory had broken. 3 years ago, he'd woken in a county hospital with the last 2 years of his life gone. No wallet that explained him. No family who came. A daughter the record swore was his, and a thin gold band threaded onto a chain around his neck. The nurses said he'd refused to let them remove it, even unconscious. He didn't know whose ring it was. He only knew that when he closed his hand around it, his chest ached like he was missing someone he couldn't name. He'd stopped asking the ring questions, but sometimes, in the half-second before sleep, he heard a woman laughing, a specific laugh, warm and a little crooked, like it tripped on the way out, and he'd wake reaching across the cushions for someone who wasn't there. He'd told a doctor once. The doctor had called it confabulation, a story the wounded brain tells to fill a hole. Adam called it the only true thing he had left. He didn't know yet that the laugh was real, that it belonged to a woman 2 miles away, that in 6 days she'd be standing close enough to touch. The new job was the reason things were finally, barely, working. A maintenance contract at some glass tower downtown, subcontracted. Nothing glamorous, but steady. Rosa next door watched Sophie after school for whatever Adam could spare. Rent was current. The fridge had food in it. He'd learned to call that good. On his second morning at Vance Tower, he was crouched in the lobby, fixing a loose floor plate when he felt someone stop. He looked up. A woman stood 10 feet away, frozen mid-step, a folder slack in her hand. Dark coat, expensive, the kind of put together that usually didn't see people like him. But she wasn't looking at him like he was furniture. She was looking at him like the floor had dropped out from under her. "Sorry," Adam said, sliding back. "Didn't mean to be in the way." Her mouth opened, closed. You're not in the way." Her voice came out wrong, too thin. She pressed it back into shape. "You're new. First week." She nodded once, the way you nod when you don't trust yourself to say anything else, and walked to the elevator, too fast. Adam watched the doors close on her. Something moved behind his ribs. The dull, familiar ache, the missing someone feeling, and he didn't understand why a stranger in a coat had set it off. Up on the 38th floor, Alana Vance leaned against the inside of the elevator and put a hand over her mouth and did not make a sound. 5 years she'd had people looking. 5 years of dead ends and lawyers and a private investigator who finally, 3 weeks ago, had said a name and a city. She had not let herself believe it until right now, until she'd seen the line of his shoulders and the way he tucked his bottom lip when he concentrated, the exact way he had the first time she ever watched him work. Her husband. Alive, on his knees in her lobby, fixing her floor, looking at her like she was no one at all. She did not run down and grab him. She wanted to. Every cell in her body wanted to. But the same investigator's file said something that stopped her cold. Subject sustained traumatic memory loss approx. 3 years prior. No recollection of period in question. He didn't know her. If she came at him with "You're my husband," she'd be a rich, unstable stranger making an impossible claim, and she'd lose him a second time. So she did the careful thing. She had his contract extended to headquarters maintenance. She made sure his hours were full, his pay corrected upward when she discovered a clerical error. And she found small reasons to be in the lobby. Grace, her assistant, noticed within the week. "You've taken 11 walks past the freight desk in 4 days," she said. "I counted because it's strange. I'm aware of my own building, Grace, of course." A pause. "He's good with the kids in the daycare, by the way. The one on 6. He fixed their reading nook on his lunch and didn't bill it." Alina turned away so Grace wouldn't see her face. Someone else noticed too. Marcus Vance had run the operational side of the company for 30 years, and he had not survived that long by missing things. He saw his niece linger. He saw who she lingered near. And when he pulled the maintenance roster and read the name Adam Cole, the glass in his hand went very still. "Tell me," he said to no one, "that this is a coincidence." It was not a coincidence. Marcus had personally signed the transfer order that moved a comatose, unidentified man 2 states away 12 years ago. He had personally handed a grieving young woman a note in handwriting that wasn't quite her husband's and let her believe she'd been abandoned. He had done worse than that, and he had buried it so deep he'd half convinced himself it never happened. And now, the thing he'd buried was kneeling in the lobby fixing the floor. What Marcus didn't know was that the truth had a way of clawing back up through the dirt. It clawed up 4 nights later at 11:50 p.m. in the rain. A pipe burst in the ceiling of Adam's apartment building. Old plumbing, deferred repairs. The kind of thing nobody fixes until it floods 3 units at once. Adam woke to water coming through the light fixture. Sophie was already burning with a fever. 102 and climbing, crying because her chest hurt. The hallway filled with neighbors and shouting, and the super saying nobody could stay tonight. Adam stood in 2 inches of water holding his sick daughter, a duffel bag of dry clothes over his shoulder, and ran out of people to call. Except 1. Days earlier, Elena had pressed a card into his hand near the loading dock. "Anything you ever need. Any hour," she'd said. And he'd thought it was the strange overkindness of a guilty, feeling rich person. He had almost thrown it out. He called. She answered on the first ring like she'd been holding the phone. A car came in 11 minutes. By midnight, Adam was standing dripping in a penthouse that could have swallowed his whole building, watching a woman he barely knew kneel in front of his daughter with a cool cloth and a calm voice, taking the fever down by degrees. Sophie, exhausted, let this stranger smooth her hair back. Children always knew. Adam stood by the window and didn't know what he knew. When Sophie finally slept, swallowed up in a guest bed too big for her, Alina pulled the blanket to the girl's chin and leaned close. "Sleep here tonight," she whispered. "You're safe now. Both of you." She meant it for the child. But when she looked up, Adam was in the doorway, and she said it again to him, quieter, like a thing she'd waited 5 years to be allowed to say. "Sleep here tonight. Please, I can't pay you back for this. I'm not asking you to." He didn't have it in him to argue. He took the couch outside Sophie's door, the way he always did, and Alina stood alone in the dark kitchen afterward with her hand over her mouth again, because she had seen something while she pressed that cloth to the little girl's forehead. A birthmark, pale and shaped like a comma, at the nape of Sophie's neck. The exact birthmark her mother had. The exact birthmark Alana had been told, in a sterile hospital corridor by her own uncle, belonged to a baby who had not survived. She slid down the cabinet to the floor and finally let herself break. Silently, both hands pressed flat against the cold tile, so the two people sleeping in her home would not wake. Adam started remembering in pieces after that night. Not memories, exactly, wrongness. The penthouse smelled like a candle he was sure he'd smelled before. There was a closed door at the end of the hall that he felt, irrationally, that he was not supposed to open. And when Alina laughed at something Sophie said over breakfast, a real laugh, surprised out of her, it tripped on the way out. Warm and a little crooked, and Adam dropped his fork. He'd heard that laugh every night for 3 years. "Are you okay?" Alana asked. Yeah, his voice didn't sound like his. "Sorry, yeah," he found the photograph 2 days later, when Sophie wandered into the off-limits room and Adam went to fetch her. A frame face down on a shelf. He turned it over without thinking. A wedding, a younger Elena, laughing, in a simple white dress, in the arms of a man in a borrowed suit who was unmistakably, impossibly him. He stood holding it with his heart slamming when Elena came in. Neither of them spoke. Then Adam said, very carefully, "Who is this?" "Adam, who is this?" She told him as much as she dared, that they had married young and in secret, because her family had decided he was beneath them, that he'd been in an accident, that she'd been told he left her, and she'd never believed it, and she'd been looking for him ever since. She did not yet say the rest, the worst part, the part about the corridor and the lie about the baby, because she didn't know how to hand a man both his wife and the truth about his daughter in the same breath. Adam set the photo down with a shaking hand. "I don't remember you," he said. "I'm sorry. I look at you and I get the feeling, the missing feeling I've had for 3 years, but I can't." He stopped. "If this is true, I have grieved you every single night without even knowing your name." "I know," she whispered. "I know. I'm not asking you to remember. I'm asking you to let me stay near while you try." What neither of them saw was Marcus, standing in the building security feed 2 floors down, watching them through a camera, realizing his lie was about to surface, and deciding, the way men like him always do, to bury it deeper. He moved that afternoon. He went to the company lawyers. He filed a quiet, vicious motion claiming Alana was emotionally unfit and being manipulated by a maintenance contractor with a falsified identity. He hinted that the child's custody was unclear. He scheduled it all to land the morning after the company's flagship charity gala. The gala where Alana would be on stage, exposed, in front of 300 guests and every camera that mattered. He would humiliate the handyman publicly, paint Elena as a woman who'd lost her grip, and make the whole problem disappear under a landslide of doubt before anyone thought to ask questions. It was a good plan. He just didn't account for the people Elena trusted, or for the box of records her uncle had assumed no one would ever dig up. Which brings us back to the atrium, to Marcus's voice carrying across the marble, to Bianca's laugh and the word traveling the room, and 300 faces deciding what Adam was. "This is embarrassing," Marcus announced, loud now, performing for the crowd, walking toward Adam with 2 security guards he'd ordered up himself. "Somebody call the contractor and have this man removed. And the child. This is a private event, not a shelter." The quartet stopped playing. The room went the particular silence of a crowd that smells blood. "He's with me," Elena said. She came down the open staircase in deep blue, unhurried, and every head turned. Marcus's smile held, but only barely. "Elena, sweetheart, you're not well. We've all seen it. This man, Alana said, reaching the floor, taking Adam's free hand in front of all of them, "is my husband." The word landed like a dropped tray. Somewhere a glass actually shattered. "That's absurd," Marcus said, too fast. "She's confused." "She's been, Grace," Alana said. The screens came alive, the enormous gala screens, meant for the donor video. The ones angled so every guest could see. And what filled them was not a donor video. It was a scanned transfer order, 12 years old, moving an unidentified patient out of state. Signed at the bottom in a hand the whole board would recognize, M. Vance. Then a handwriting analysis, side by side, of a goodbye note and Adam's real signature, not a match. Then a sealed family services record, unsealed now by court order, with a name and a date and a stamp that said a baby had been declared deceased, who had, very plainly, not been. Marcus's face drained from red to gray to nothing. 12 years ago, Alana said, and her voice did not shake, my uncle moved my husband across the country while he lay unconscious. He forged a note so I would think I'd been left. And when our daughter was born, her voice caught once, and held. He told me she died. He told me she died, and he gave her to the only other person in the world who couldn't contradict him. A man with no memory. 300 people turned, as one, to look at the little girl in the light-up sneakers holding her father's hand. "Daddy," Sophie whispered. "Why is the lady crying?" And Adam was somewhere else entirely. Because when Alana had said our daughter, something in the broken room of his mind had finally found the light switch. The laugh. The crooked laugh in the dark. A hospital. A white dress in the rain. A woman's voice saying, "We'll name her after your mother," and the absolute certainty, rising up through 3 years of fog like a body surfacing in water, that he had loved this woman with everything he had, and that they had taken it from him. "Ellie," he said. She went still. No one had called her that since. "Ellie," he said again, and his eyes were streaming, and he wasn't reading it off a screen. He was remembering. "You wore your mother's earrings and you couldn't stop laughing during the vows, and I thought I was the luckiest." His knees nearly went. "Oh my God. Sophie, Sophie." Bianca was backing toward the door. Margaret from the committee and 3 other guests had their phones up and recording. Marcus took 1 step toward the exit and found Theo, Elena's head of security, and 2 actual police officers standing in it. "Miss Vance," one of them said. "We'd like you to come with us." "The consequences," Elena said quietly, watching them take her uncle's arm, are only beginning. They were. By Monday, Marcus Vance had been removed from the board by a vote that took less than 4 minutes and was unanimous. By Tuesday, the falsified records had become a criminal matter. Fraud, falsifying medical and family services documents, and charges around the unlawful concealment of a child that the district attorney described, on camera, as among the most disturbing I have prosecuted. His personal accounts were frozen. The men who'd called him a friend on Saturday did not return his calls by Thursday. He'd spent 30 years making himself the center of a world, and the world simply closed over the spot where he'd been, the way water does. He left 2 voicemails for Elena. She did not return them. Some distances, once a person creates them, do not close. Bianca learned that a name can curdle overnight. The invitation stopped. The friends who'd laughed with her at the gala were suddenly, permanently busy. She'd built her whole self out of being a Vance, and she discovered too late that it had never been hers to spend. Adam heard about all of it and felt no triumph. He sat with the news a long while, and then said only, "I keep thinking about all the years we lost. I don't have room left over to enjoy his." His memory came back the way a tide comes in, not all at once, but steadily, a little more each day. Some pieces never returned. He made peace with that. The important ones were already home. 4 months later, Adam woke at 6:30, not on a couch and not alone. The house was quiet in the good way. Down the hall, Sophie's door had her name on it now in wooden letters she'd painted herself, purple, with a comma of a birthmark her mother kissed every single night. There were new sneakers by the door, the kind that lit up and had stars, because Alina had taken one look at the old pinching pair and quietly handled it without making it a thing. He made coffee without measuring the grounds twice. He'd noticed himself stop a few weeks back and had to sit down. Alina came into the kitchen in his old flannel, hair a mess, and laughed at something he said before he'd even finished saying it. The crooked laugh, tripping on the way out. He had it memorized from 2 directions now. The 3 years he'd heard it in the dark without a name, and every morning since he'd gotten the name back. "Sophie wants pancakes," she said. "Sophie has decided this is a pancake family." "Is it?" "It's whatever she says it is." He crossed the kitchen and put the thin gold band back where it belonged, on his own hand, where it had finally stopped aching. They'd remarried in the backyard a month ago, small, with Sophie throwing fistfuls of petals and 1 extra fistful directly at the officiant. No press, no glass tower, just the 3 of them and Rosa and Grace, and a cake that leaned slightly to the left. Sophie thundered in, climbed onto a stool, and looked between her parents with the deep satisfaction of a child who has gotten exactly what she demanded from the universe. "I told my class," she announced, "that I have a dad who fixes everything, and a mom who owns a whole building." "You left out that I burn pancakes," Alana said. "I left out the boring stuff." Outside, it had started to rain. The same rain that 4 months ago had washed 2 lost people up onto a stranger's doorstep who turned out to be the opposite of a stranger. Inside, it was warm. Adam stood at the stove with his wife's shoulder against his arm and his daughter narrating his cooking and the ring back on his hand, and he thought about how a man can grieve a person every night for 3 years without knowing her name, and then one day get to keep her. He didn't remember everything. He'd decided that was all right. Some things the heart hangs on to long after the mind lets go.